8.1 was given the character of level views, countryside foreground, generally soft urban edge. Is that, have I misunderstood?
Not, no, you haven't entirely misunderstood. What that shows, it says there in the key, it says townscape countryside interface. So what it's acknowledging is that there are level views towards a mixed urban edge. Now, clearly that's going to have an effect on the character. It doesn't identify it as a difference in character, but what it's doing is it's saying that that piece of land there is influenced by a mixed urban edge.
But the problem I have is that I'm not seeing that on sector 8.1. Oh, right, okay. Apologies. It's the difficulties of the different maps. We're with you now. Sorry about that.
Okay, in relation to the landscape character first, which is figure 8. As I explained earlier, the landscape character assessment was carried out at a relatively broad scale level to get an understanding of the context of the city. Landscape character boundaries are rarely abrupt, and there are often areas of transition between different character areas. In this case, between areas 4B and 4C, and if, I'm afraid it's not page juggling, if we're able to turn to page 40 of our study, you may pause. The bottom of page 40 is 4B Grant Valley, which is one of the two character areas in question. There are a couple of paragraphs of description of 4B, and over the page there's 3 paragraphs of description of 4C, which is the other character area. Without going through more detail now, the main differences between the two character areas, the differences are relatively subtle, and they're mainly to do with the size and distribution of the villages and the degree of woodland cover. Now, no precise line can be drawn as to where you move from one of those character areas to another. The character area boundaries shown on figure 8 are approximate. And within sector 8.1 itself, there aren't any villages and there isn't any woodland. So you can't precisely say for that specific sector that it is particularly more characteristic of 4B or 4C. It's in the zone of transition between them. When we come to figure 9, the boundary that Smith indicated is the extent of the area from which there are views of the urban edge. So the northern parts of area 8.1, the urban edge is visible. The southern parts, the land falls away down to the river and railway. The urban edge is no longer visible. I need to jump the pages again. But in the assessment of sector 8, from page 115 onwards, the influence of the urban edge is picked up on the northern part of the sector. Criterion 16, refers to the visual intrusion of continuing development of Green Farm, which encroaches on the rural character. And there may be other references within the detail. When it comes to the conclusion on the importance to green belt purposes at 6.11.13 on page 119, we refer to the role the sector plays, or sub-area 8.1 plays, in the setting of the south of Cambridge, ensuring expansion doesn't continue unchecked. That has relevance for sprawl and for the setting and character in terms of the historic core remain large in comparison to the city as a whole. It refers to the importance of open countryside close to the expanding edge of the city, preventing expansion as far as the M11, and to the gateway. It also refers to the separation between villages. Those qualities apply across the sub-area. The fact that the southern part of the sub-area is beyond the visual horizon for the urban edge isn't relevant to that. And whether it is in landscape character area 4B or 4C or in the transition zone, as in fact it is, they don't affect those conclusions. What we said in our methodology, sorry, on more bit page, directly on page 15, our 3.2.5, page 15, second sentence, most sectors divide into sub-areas where there were clear changes in these characteristics which would affect the application of the assessment criteria to different areas of land. That isn't the case within sub-area 8.1, so we assessed it as an entire sub-area.
Thank you for that. Again, just by way of clarification, I'm intrigued actually, if we have a part of a site which your evidence base says is influenced by the existing settlement edge, I'm intrigued that that does not have any effect on the purpose of that site or its efficacy in green belt terms. I'm also intrigued that what you've identified is a visual enclosure. When you've looked at the extent of views to the south of the urban edge, you have seen a clear visual envelope, which is what you show. On figure 9. So what we have there, I hear what you say about the fact that you feel the whole sector, it's irrelevant to go into this degree of detail, but I think that it's important that the inspector knows that when you say that, you are painting the whole of this sector with the same conclusions, even though you have acknowledged that there is urban influence at the northern end, and even though your evidence base acknowledges that there is a visual envelope across the centre of the site. I appreciate what you say about landscape character and the fact that those boundaries are transitional, but as I say, what your urban edge analysis there is showing that there is a defined area which is influenced by the settlement edge. Now, surely, given that it's a defined visual area, and given that it is influenced by the settlement edge and the M11 and various other features. Doesn't that have a bearing on whether something is less or more susceptible to encroachments from various green belt functions?
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you. I'm just trying to listen to what you're saying there. I think I've largely addressed the point. There are variations in characteristics within the sector. That horizons, you have south, transition to character areas. Also, for example, the degree of influence of the M11 on the west side of the sector is on the east side. Those don't affect the overall conclusions about the performance of green belt purposes. When we draw together the 16 criteria as assessed for this sector, the sector, as we say in 611.3, plays a key role in the setting of the south of Cambridge for the reasons that we set out there, which are to do with the continued expansion of the city and the diminution of the focus on the historic core, which is an issue of character and setting, in terms of sprawl, and in terms of other aspects of the setting, such as the countryside flowing in from the west across the motorway up to the urban edge. Those are the qualities that lead to the conclusion as to the importance of this sub-area. There are variations in characteristics, but they don't affect that conclusion.
Yeah, I'm not going to go around in circles. Obviously, you've answered the question. I just think from the specific question you have asked, and that we are trying to debate here, is whether these areas should be broken down. The point I'm raising about Sector 8.1 in this context is we've agreed that there's a variation in character across this area. Mr. Crawford feels that that isn't significant in terms of green belt purposes. I would beg to differ. I think that it's very significant. And I think the fact that it hasn't been subdivided, I think is really missing an important issue about the more diverse nature of the landscape. I'll be honest, I think this goes back to something more fundamental. Again, Mr. Crawford very fairly acknowledges that it is a broad-scale landscape character assessment that's been carried out. Well, I think that's perhaps one of the problems we have here. We have a very high-level landscape character assessment, which we're then trying to use as part of our evidence base to make decisions about sectors. And I think the truth is there's not enough information there to really help us. I think maybe if the landscape character assessment were a little bit more detailed, then maybe we could start to look at smaller parcels, and I think that is necessary.
If I may, I think I've answered the substantive question, just in relation to the level at which the landscape character assessment was undertaken. I've explained that we undertook at a broad level to gain an understanding of the context of the city and the influences that surround that relate to the countryside surrounding the city. And I would just note that within Sabbath's statement, we've got criticism for taking an overly landscape assessment-based approach to the study. So we're getting it from both sides. I feel that we're taking a balanced and appropriate approach.
Thank you. Well, I'll come back to you, Mr. Adams, but I'm going to take a break now because I just want to reassure myself that I've got the correct notes of the the discussion going through all these different maps. So it's 20 past 11 now. We'll resume at 20 to 12. Thank you. I'm going to start drilling down into things that can be better considered in specific sessions. So having said that, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Madam. I'm not going to refer to sites, just point on methodology. Before the break, Mr. Smith and Mr. Crawford discussed the relevance of urban edge or urban fringe as a characteristic when assessing greenbelt character and purposes. And I thought it might be helpful to refer to one of the very few pieces of guidance that is available to us, which is the Planning Advisory Service guidance entitled Planning on the Doorstep, the Big Issues Greenbelt, which was published in 2014. And that document is RD Strat 460. Now this is, as I think you indicated in your opening, Madam, quite a short piece of guidance, but nevertheless it is available to us, and it does refer to this point about urban fringe and where it might fit into the analysis. And the question of urban fringe is considered in relation to Greenbelt reviews, which I think is page 6 of the report. And specifically, it is considered briefly in relation to the purpose of the Greenbelt of assisting in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. So in that context, and I'll just read this out because it is quite short, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. Presumably all Greenbelt does this, making the purpose difficult to use to distinguish the contribution of different areas. The most useful approach is to look at the difference between open fringe, land under the influence of the other area, and open countryside, and to favour the latter, i.e. open countryside, in determining which land to try and keep open, taking into account the types of edges and boundaries that can be achieved. Now, urban fringe, land under the influence of the urban area, would, I believe, include land which is where there are clear views of the urban edge. And that brings it to our discussion around figure 9 and Mr. Smith's question. So I think the answer to Mr. Smith's question is yes, it is relevant to greenbelt purposes if the site is influenced by the urban area, built development, or indeed I think that would also include major infrastructure. And I sort of make that point because I think if the guidance is available to us, we should refer to it.
Mr. Crawford?
Yeah, I definitely think I disagree with that. It is a consideration that we've taken into account, and if it's helpful to have an example, which can be go into another sector, by way of example, sector 11 on page 133 of our study. If we look at criterion 9 on page 133, the soft green edge of the city refers to the nature of the edge in the vicinity of sector 11, varying from abrupt hard edges and modern housing to vegetated areas. And then the paragraph ends by saying that, the last 3 lines, applies towards Cambridge soft green edge present around some of the older parts of Cambridge, which creates a distinctive boundary between the urban and rural, is not present, and the urban edge would benefit from softening. If we turn the page to criterion 16, final paragraph, final paragraph against item 16, the urbanising influence of the edge of Cambridge on the rural sector in South East Cambridge could be reduced through planting and vegetation management along the urban edge. And then we took that into account in terms of identifying potential for greenbelt release. And paragraph 614.6 at the bottom of page 135, we set out how a release following our parameters can avoid significant harm. And the final bullet over the page, so it's the second bullet on page 136. Sorry, that's not the right bullet, that's the first bullet on page 136. Says a well-vegetated soft green edge to the city would minimise the urban influences on the retained green belt, thus minimising the perception of encroachment into the countryside. So, effectively, I'm agreeing with the validity and the appropriateness of the reference as guidance, and we have taken that into account, and that's an example of how we follow it through.
Okay, well, that's no doubt something that can be followed up in relation to specific sites at a later date. Mr. Adams, is there anything else you want to say? The general point?
Just whilst we have the Planning Advisory Service guidance open, as it were, Mr. Smith referred to sprawl in the discussion. Sorry, Mr. Crawford referred to sprawl in the discussion with Mr. Smith. I think the word sprawl will probably crop up quite a lot in our discussion around greenbelt. So I'm a bit concerned that we don't use the word too loosely, and I think I'm sure we will come to the question of sprawl, and so I wanted to refer to PAS comment on sprawl, which is in the context of purpose of the greenbelt to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. And they state, their advice is that the terminology of sprawl comes from the 1930s when greenbelt was conceived. They then pose the question, has this term changed in meaning since then? For example, is development that is planned positively through a local plan and well designed with good master planning sprawl? It's a question. But I think that's quite an important point for us to be considering in relation to planned extensions of built-up area, because I would contend that the recent planned extensions of the Cambridge area have been planned positively. They are well designed with good master planning, and you can see plenty of evidence of the quality of master planning design around the southern edge of the city and indeed the northwest area. And therefore, it should not automatically be assumed that an extension to those growth areas would necessarily constitute sprawl, because inevitably it would be subject to very high standards of design. And there are a lot of references in the analysis to sprawl, and I certainly read the analysis across the sectors as an assumption that any development extending beyond built-up areas is sprawl. And I'm just concerned that we don't lose sight of this helpful guidance that is reminding us that the actual test is unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. And that's the test in the green belt, and that it shouldn't be automatically assumed that any extension of the built-up area would constitute sprawl for the purposes of the framework's test.
Thank you. I acknowledge that. I don't think that we have made that assumption. Two slightly related points. The one is that, and this comes discussing later, but one of our qualities, quality 10, good urban structure with well-designed edges to the city, I think is very much around the same point. And there's a well-finished, well-designed edge to the city, as we have now at Green Farm, for example, with a which is designed as a long-term edge to the city, makes it, I think, less vulnerable to sprawl than some of the less well-designed development we see, for example, around the southeast of the city, which I think a lot of the existing development there could be described as sprawl. But there's a question there, well, if you put something well-designed onto the edge of something that is sprawl, I'm not saying I would say that you can necessarily say, well, because it's well-designed it isn't sprawl, if it's added to sprawl, then I think it probably has an element of sprawl to it.
Okay, I'm sure that that's something that is going to be returned to in the context of individual sites. Mr. Brockhurst.
Thank you. Returning to the land parcel size, I think it's fair to say that that starting point and the scale of the assessment that is applied to the larger areas, it becomes critical when the process is gone through and we are reaching the parameters, and I know we're going to talk qualities and their relevance, but in terms of how the information, the broad scale assessment of large parcels is then interpreted with parameters, really does require precision and definition in terms more than just a narrative, because otherwise there is a series of interpretation upon which we all rely in order to determine where lines are being drawn. And so in terms of sector 11, what we have from the answers from LDA thus far on the sides is that across this area and within sector 11.1 and 11.2, there is no marked difference in character across this area, which would mean that you could define sub-parcels. So there is a consistency across that area. And then you come to the definition of the parameters for a greenbelt release, which appear to relate to a more precise and detailed analysis, seeking to draw distinctions within the parcel, which we know does not have those distinctions, hence the fact that it is a single land parcel and hasn't been subdivided.
Yeah. I think, Madam, I'd just like to take up what Ms. Brockhurst has just said, because she's absolutely right to emphasise the answer given by Mr. Crawford earlier this morning, that it was divided into smaller parcels if there was clear changes between land performance against greenbelt purposes. And I appreciate you don't want to get into individual sites, but I mean, an example, as we will just have to have a look at in a moment, just to explain the importance of that answer, is what we by looking at, for example, sector 11. Because sector 11 has not been subdivided, and yet, as I will demonstrate in a moment, it is in the parameters that are given by the rewritten parameters, I should say, given by LDA, it is identified as having two different character areas for the purposes of greenbelt assessment. So, and it's clear, and what Mr. Carpen said is clearly wrong, and it's just not sustainable. I think the context, however, as we go back to of this whole discussion today, has got to be recalled. And the context is that LDA in November 2015 produced a report which was born out of your concern about the robustness, transparency and clarity of the Council's 2012 study. That's the context. And LDA were commissioned to produce a report. They did so in November 2015. It's unusual in this respect, isn't it, that report was effectively produced to justify the allocations or not. It's ordinarily, a Greenbelt study would be used to identify the allocations rather than vice versa, but it's entirely a consequence of your concern in relation to the original Greenbelt study that the LDA report was produced. Now, I don't make a particular criticism of that way round, because inevitably, if you were concerned about the robustness of the LDA, of the original council study, something else had to be produced. We are where we are. But what's interesting about the LDA study is that because it comes later, it doesn't actually purport to endorse any of the council's allocations. It doesn't produce a single plan, not a single plan, which identifies the extent of development that should take place, which is astonishing. And it leaves itself, as I shall demonstrate in a moment, to great confusion and not a little bit of concern that it is being used to ex post facto justify the council's decisions. It is, of course, important for you to have confidence and for there to be public confidence that the Greenbelt assessment has been done in a clear, transparent and robust way. And as I shall demonstrate in a moment, it has not. The context, therefore, LDA produced their report in 2015, and objections are made to it. And then suddenly, apropos, nothing from you, nothing from no request for information from any others, the LDA produced a supplementary report. And it's that I'd like you to just take up, please.
We think our copy may be elsewhere at the moment. Mr. Wood's going to get it. So we took some documents with us in the break so that I could check the notes that I'd made in the earlier discussion, and we may
Can I give you a spare one, just in case?
Well, wait till Mr. Wood comes back up, please. But just to say, Mr. Village, as I said at the start, I'm happy for you to make reference to particular circumstances as an example.
Yeah, I
but
I
okay,
don't worry. Because I mean, clearly,
Because
we've got limited time. I'm not.
Yes.
I'm going to be dipping, just taking you to just
Okay.
explain with one example.
Because, as you know, you're going to have an opportunity
I know that.
later in the process.
I'm completely aware of that. Don't worry, please. You just trust my judgment. I won't go further than I absolutely need to. Just to simply demonstrate what has gone on is wrong.
Okay. Mr. Spry's sitting behind you, smiling broadly, so he obviously has confidence in your judgment as well.
written by Mr. Crawford. I think you wrote this, didn't you? Yeah. And what you do in page 10 is you say, whilst it's believed the parameters, but first of all, I think it's fair to say that for the first time in this document, you actually say that the City Council's proposed allocations reflect correct interpretation of the parameters, whilst CG's interpretation is incorrect. That's not been, that point has not been made in the original document, in the original LDA report of November 2015 business. And then it goes on, whilst it's believed the parameters in the study are clear, they've been reviewed in the light of CG's misinterpretation, the accusers, of the following amendments proposed to add greater clarity. And then the following amendments, which, and it's fair to say, of course, that these parameters are set out for each, and you'll have to have a look at these parameters in due course. But again, we're just looking at this as an example. But what you, just to follow this point, and just, as I said, I promise you, I'm not getting into site specifics here. You just need to follow the approach that's undertaken by Mr. Crawford. If you take out Tyler Graham's representations, do you have that document, sir?
Do you mean your representations or your statement?
Our statement to the...
Right, we've got your statement.
So concerning that, there's a diagram, which is as Appendix 1.
Is this the figure 3.1?
It is indeed. And so remember the allegation against us is that we misinterpreted the position. And I've got any number of points I'll be making in due course when we get to the site specifics, but just look at this point as to how, by the stroke of a pen, by just adding a word, the whole emphasis is changed by Mr. Crawford. So in terms of the third bullet point, land in the southwestern part of sub-area 11.1 could also be released for development. The boundary of any land released in this location should correspond with the edge of any release in sub-area 11.2 to create a clear urban gateway, in other words, causeway. The new urban gateway should be no further east than approximately half the distance from the existing urban edge west of sub-area 11.2 towards Cherry Hinton Road / Lime Kiln Road. To the northeast, any greenbelt release should extend no further than the existing, and of course it used to say eastern edge, and it now has been changed to say southeastern edge. And if you look at where that's, what the effect of that is, it's identified by, you can see the change in this plan at 3.1. It makes a huge difference. But even still, it's not it doesn't actually accord with what the council are now proposing. Because the council keep GD1 to the south of Beaumont Road. The southeastern corner is a bit further up on the curve, if you like. That's the southeastern corner of Beaumont Road. And as it was stated, it was in fact the eastern side of Beaumont Road, and that's marked by the yellow dotted line. So, Mr. Crawford, I just thought if you could just help clarify with me this point. It's clear that, in fact, your words in this paragraph don't accord with the way the council have allocated the plan, do they? Well, it's a clarification.
Well, yes, but if you could put the questions through me, Mr. Village, rather than appearing to be questioning Mr. Crawford directly.
I was simply following what I thought was an excellent by Mr. Smith non-cross-examination, Mr. Crawford, earlier this morning. So I've got a lot of questions with you. It's clear that, sorry Mr. Crawford, do you want to take some instructions? No. It's clear that the words do not in fact accord with the application that is identified here, do they?
Can you clarify that point, Mr. Crawford?
Could I perhaps just step back and pick up a couple of points that Village made earlier and then follow through to this. First of all, he said that purpose of the report to justify the council's allocations, purpose of our study. It was not, that wasn't what we were commissioned to do, and that wasn't how we approached it. It was, we were commissioned to undertake an independent assessment of the performance against greenbelt purposes, which is what we did. It shouldn't be a major surprise that the conclusions are broadly consistent with the great majority of the studies of the greenbelt that have been undertaken over the years, going right back to the Holford report in 1950 and other studies since, which have emphasised the importance of retaining Cambridge's compact character, limiting growth, keeping development off the Gold Hills, keeping the open land on the west side of the city, etc. So our report in that sense is just the last in a long line of reports that concludes that there is little scope for greenbelt release. It wasn't the role of the study to delineate areas for potential release from greenbelt, but it was the role, having assessed the importance of land to greenbelt, to explore the scope for the release of land and whether such a release could take place without significant harm to greenbelt purposes, on the basis that all the land that then remained in greenbelt could continue to perform those purposes equally effectively as I described earlier. The actual delineation of the extent of development would depend on consideration of a wide range of factors, many of which would be outside the scope of greenbelt purposes. And for that reason, it wasn't the role of the study to draw lines on plans for potential releases. If we come back to the parameters as set out in the original study on page 135 and 136, paragraph 6.14.6 is the there onwards is the section that was amended in the March agenda. What I'd like to do is to highlight the things within that text as in the original study, which I say CEG misinterpreted. 6.14.6 starts with the word limited development on the relatively flat ground in the western parts of the sector is what we're saying could be undertaken. Turning over the page to the third bullet, the rising topography of the Gods would be kept open, and open rural land would be retained at the foot of the hills, i.e. not on the slopes, but on the relatively flat land at that foot. in the foreground in key views, and those are more localised importance. Moving down to the parameters, the first one, land should be restricted to relatively flat ground, not to stretch onto the sloping ground. Second one, land along the western edge of sub-area 11.2 could be released for development. And if you have the plan opposite, you can see that the micropics on the opposite page, the following page, page 436. So the western edge of 11.2, 11.2 broadly has an east-west alignment. The west edge abuts the existing city edge. The east edge abuts Limekiln Road and has the Carpen ride in the south-east corner. So we're talking about land on the western edge of 11.2 potentially being released. A substantial buffer should be retained as green belt between the new urban gateway, i.e. the edge of any released development, and the park and ride. And then it refers to cross-relating to the release in Sector 10 to create a coherent gateway on the Abraham Road. Then the following bullet, the boundary of any land released on the western edge of sub-area 11.1. So again, looking at the plan, 11.1 is effectively a reverse L shape. So with the let's change the analogy. Let's talk of it as tortoise or leg shaped, like Italy. The leg is in the eastern half of 11.1, and the front part, the foot and the toes are on the western point, abutting the city edge. So we're talking about a release along the western edge of 11.1, and that it should correspond with the edge of your release in 11.2. And then to the northeast, as in the northeast corner of any release, it should extend no further than the existing eastern edge of development along Beaumont Road. In my foot-leg analogy, I read the shin, if you like, which is roughly half the length of Beaumont Road. That is the edge to which it should not extend beyond in that parameter. When we received the representations from CG in relation to the sector, they had they included a plan, which showed a much more extensive development proposal throughout large parts of sectors 11.1 and 11.2, and it was annotated to purport to demonstrate that it was consistent with the parameters we set out in the study. And in fact it wasn't at all consistent, but the various points I've highlighted are points that it was not consistent with. Now that I described as misinterpretation, and I stand by that. And in
misrepresentation.
Don't think it says that. The representation, it's at the end, I'd like to see used misinterpretation. Final line of the introductory paragraph on writing 3. So, for whatever reason, by whatever means, CG misinterpreted the parameters as set out in the original study, and in discussion with the team, it was decided that as a result of that and some issues arising from other representations, it would be appropriate to issue a supplement to the study which contained minor changes to wording to reduce the scope for any similar misrepresentation. So the changes to the wording that are set out in the supplement simply try to add extra extra emphasis to the points that are already in their individual study, which I've just talked through, and try to avoid any scope for further confusion or misinterpretation.
I think you just said, reduce the scope of misrepresentation. But anyway, leaving those misrepresentation or misinterpretation aside, Madam, the difficulty with what you've just been told is that...
I'm not sure my microphone's on, Mr.
Sorry.
Bennett.
So I think it is now, sorry. The difficulty with what you've just been told is that the South, what we gave, identified in the plan, showing the existing eastern edge of development along Beaumont Road, has now been changed to the southeastern. And you still haven't received an answer to the very one question I asked of Mr. Crawford, that in fact what has been allocated does not accord with the words in this paragraph, which refer to should extend no further than the existing southeastern edge. Now, leaving aside the fact that he's changed eastern to southeastern, we haven't dealt with is whether or not those words accord with what has been allocated, because they clearly don't.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Crawford to deal with those 2 points, but I'm beginning to feel that we're getting into territory which would be better dealt with when we come to your site-specific
I understand,
section.
but this is just an example of where, because you haven't got any plans, and I'll come to another example in a moment, nothing to do with our site. But the reason I want to look at that is I just want to examine the robustness of what's taking place. I think I understand that. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, I'm just looking at the process.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm feeling that we're getting to the point now where we're getting too much into the detail that would be better considered on another day. Mr. Crawford.
The change from eastern to southeastern, considering my leg and foot analogy, I had felt in the original study referring to the eastern extent of Beaumont Road was clear, as I had described, but it turned out that it was misinterpreted by CPG. Looking at the plan again, given that this doesn't sit precisely with the leg heading north, it's slightly northeast, I felt to clarify the extent that I intended by referring it to southeastern, i.e. the point where the leg becomes the foot, if you like, clarified that. But the intention, it wasn't any change to the intended parameters, it was a response to the misinterpretation of the previous parameters. To respond to the allocation point, we, as you noted within the supplement, we have commented that the City Council proposed allocations are consistent and are an appropriate interpretation of the parameters. But, for example, in Sector 13, which I know is an issue that is dear to CG's heart, we identified from our study that actually the proposed allocation breached the parameters of what we felt could be an acceptable release, and that it extended east of the Yarrow Road roundabout. So in that one, we highlighted that issue to the councils, and they've taken appropriate action. And just to complete things from the opposite side of the picture, in Sector 10 we identified a potential release where there was no proposal by the councils for a release. So in terms of the allocations, the assessments of our conclusions, we have formed our own conclusions. In places they are, as in sectors 11 and 12, that the the release should in our view be smaller than have been identified.
Okay.
Well, you have received an answer to the question, which is whether the words used in that parameters are consistent with what is drawn on the allocation.
You have.
And
Well, Mr. Village, I've heard what Mr. Crawford said, and for present purposes, that's enough. You're going to have an opportunity, as I say, to drill down into that. You have the answers that Mr. Crawford has given today, and you know, if you want to return to that in the specific session dealing with your proposals, I'm more than happy to hear that then, but I don't really want to carry on that discussion today.